Okay, so today we're starting these rules for multiplication. So now that we know the distributive property, we want to look at a few new properties. And now I know that some of you are thinking, oh man, some new properties. We've already got a bunch to learn. And some of you are still confused on some of those old properties, and you need to go back and check them. Okay? You need to make sure they're clear, because we're going to keep using those ones, and then as the course goes on, you're going to keep learning new things. Okay? So the first one that we want to look at today is something that you've known since kindergarten, but here, or well, I don't know if kindergarten, but since you first start multiplying, was probably about third grade or so, and so you know this, but now they're giving it a name, and you have to know the name of the property, because eventually you're going to get to this point where you're doing these algebraic proofs, where they're going to give you these equations, and they're going to say, why is this true? And you're needing to know why, what's the reason. And so you already know that 1 times anything is that anything. So you know that if you multiply 6 times 1, it's 6. And you know that if I multiply 1 billion times 1, it's 1 billion. Okay, so you know that. And this is called the identity property of multiplication. Okay, when you multiply anything by 1, it'll give you itself. And you already know 6 times 1 is 6. And you know that negative 16 times 1 is negative 16. Okay, so for multiplication, we call 1 the identity element for multiplication. That means that's the element, that's the number that you'll multiply by to give it itself. Identity. Identity, ID, me. So what's the number I'm going to multiply by me to get myself? It's 1. All right, so here's a question real quick. This is a review. What's the identity element for addition? Raise your hand if you know what the don't say, but just raise your hand if you know it. If you don't know it, leave your hand down so I'll know who knows it and doesn't know. In other words, what's the number I'm going to add to myself to get myself?
1.
I didn't say that. No, that's multiplication. If I multiply anything times 1, I'll get myself. What do I add to myself to get myself? What is it, Tiffany? 0. 0 is the additive identity element. So 0 is the number I'm going to add to myself and still get myself. And with multiplication, it's 1. That's the multiplicative identity element. Okay? And so you're going to need to know that name of that property. So that's pretty basic. You know how to use it. You just got to make sure you know the name of it, okay? Next, the multiplicative property of 0. And again, you know this from 3rd grade because you know that anything times 0 will give you 0, okay? 0 cancels everything out. So when you multiply anything times 0, it's like the atom bomb. 0 comes in and boom, everything's gone. It's just all 0 when you're multiplying, okay? And so we know that 6,381,402 times 0 is 0. Okay? What you need to make sure you know is that's the multiplicative property of 0. Okay? All right. Now this one you probably know as well, but maybe not. This is the one where you'll make the most mistakes. This is the one when I correct the homework or when I look at the worksheets, this is one of the common errors I find is that you'll miss this property. And it's the multiplicative property of negative 1. And that just means that for every real number, when you multiply any number times negative 1, you're going to get the opposite of that number. So if I multiply a by negative 1, I get negative a, or the opposite of a. Whatever a is, I'll get its opposite by multiplying it by negative 1. Okay? And that's all that says. So 16 multiplied by negative 1 is the opposite of 16, which is negative 16. When I multiply negative 63 times negative 1, I'm going to get the opposite of negative 63, which is 63. Okay? And that's the multiplicative property of negative 1. And we'll see this, especially when we start using it with the distributive property, where you'll have something like this. You'll have minus 6 minus, well, we'll have a variable, so we'll have p. Minus 6 minus p. And you'll do this. You'll do the opposite of 6, but you'll forget, this is the part you'll forget that you have, when you distribute to everyone in the group. Everyone gets the Snicker bar, right? We don't leave the p out. And so you'll forget that the opposite of negative p, which is p. So you'll remember the opposite of 6, but a lot of times you'll forget the opposite of p as well. Okay? And so that's something that's common, and that's what we'll see. So you got to really be careful with that multiplicative property of negative 1, that especially when you're distributing it, that you're distributing it everywhere. Okay. The property of opposites in products. All right, so keep it up there. So when I multiply two numbers, that's what a product is, right? So just a review, when we multiply two numbers, the answer is their product, okay? So for any real numbers, A and B, when I multiply two numbers and they have opposite signs, I'm going to multiply the numbers and use the negative sign. Okay, so when I multiply a negative times a positive, I'll get a negative. And when I multiply a negative times a negative, I'll get a positive. Okay, so if the signs are the same, then I'm going to get a positive number. You already know that if I multiply two positive numbers, I'm going to get a positive number, because you know 3 times 2 is 6. Anytime I multiply two positive numbers, I'm going to get a positive number. But when I multiply two negative numbers, I'm also going to get a positive number. Okay? The product of opposites. Property of opposites. Now when I multiply two things with different signs, one's a positive and one's a negative, it doesn't matter which is first and which is second. When I multiply two things where one is positive and one's negative, the answer is going to be negative. Okay? So let's look at a couple of these real quick. So 3 multiplied by negative 2 is negative 6. Notice a positive and a negative, two different signs, is going to give me a negative number. So I multiply 3 times 2 and it's 6, it's negative 6. And it doesn't matter if the first one's positive and the second one is negative, or if the first one is negative and the second one's positive. Negative 4 times 7 is negative 28. Different signs, a negative answer. Okay? And then notice, 2 negatives is going to give me a positive. So I have negative 8 times negative 5 is positive 40. That's the property of opposites in products. Okay. And then finally, some rules for multiplication. So if two numbers, and I kind of went over that when I did the property of opposites of products. So if two numbers have the same sign, their product is positive. Okay? So 9 times 8 is 72. You already knew that. And I didn't give an example of it. Oh, I did, yeah. Negative 6 times negative 3. If they're both negative, they're both the same sign, it's a positive 18. So same sign, the product is positive. If two numbers have opposite signs, that's just different signs, their product is negative. So 8 times negative 9 again is negative 72. Different signs, a negative number. And again, this one just has the negative number first, and that, again, it doesn't matter. Different signs, negative and positive, will give me a negative number, negative 18. Okay, and then rule number 2 says the product of an even number of negative numbers is positive. Okay, so if I'm multiplying a bunch of different things, and I can have, doesn't matter how many, I picked 4, but I could be multiplying 20 different things. If I'm multiplying more than 2 things, a big long line, you just count the negatives. How many negative numbers are in my chain? Here I have 1, 2. If I have an even number of negatives, then my answer is going to be positive. That's what that's saying. The product of an even number of negative numbers is positive. Now if I count them and I have 1, 2, 3 negatives, if it's an odd number, then my answer is going to be negative. And the numbers are just adding up to each other. So 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 3 is 36. So 36, and then it's positive because I have an even number of negatives. Down here, 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 3 is 36. But because I have an odd number of negatives, my answer is negative. Okay? You can think of it like this. Every 2 negatives cancel each other out. So that negative is cancel each other out. I've left nothing but positives. Here, that negative, 2 negatives cancel each other out, but I still have 1 left. So that's my negative. That's easier to think of it like that.
Wait, so what if you had, let's say you had 3, no. Let's say you had like 2 negative numbers and 3 positive numbers.
Uh-huh.
Does it matter? So it only matters that there's an even amount of negative numbers?
Right, and that will give you what kind of an answer?
It'll give you a positive.
That's right. You could have 56 negative numbers and 12 positive numbers. The 56 negative numbers the 56 is even. So when I multiply those 60-some numbers, my answer would be positive. So all you care about is the number. That's what that's getting at. The number of negatives that you're multiplying and the number, whether it's even or odd. Okay? So let's do some quick examples and then go around the room and then you can start on your sheets. Okay. So let's start with Katie. Negative 6 times 7. Negative 42. Very good. Okay. Shay. Negative 23 times 0 times 4. That's the atom bomb, right? You're multiplying three things. You got a 0 in there. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. It's just 0. Elise. Let's do this one. 2 times 5 times negative 20. Negative 200. Very good. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 times 20 is 200. I have a 1 odd, which is a 1 negative, which is an odd number. So it's a negative answer. Very good. Gianna. Negative 4 times negative 9. Good. 2 negatives multiplied give you a positive, and it's 36. Okay. Why don't you do this one? 2 times negative 3 times 12 times negative 1. Sorry. So 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 12 is 72. How many negatives do you have? Is that an even or odd number? It's an even number, so that means it's going to be positive. Positive 72. Tim, 6x times negative 3y.
You got 6x times negative 3y. Is that the answer?
No, that's the question. I understand what you're saying. I couldn't add 6x and negative 3y. If that was a plus sign instead of a multiplication, that's all you can do. You can't add your x's and y's. You can multiply them because you're doing groups of them. Okay, that's what I went over at the end of the class before that.
So negative 18.
Negative 18.
Times 8 and y.
What?
X and y. X and y. Sorry.
Close enough.
It's an x. Do you see that? You don't know what the x and y are, so you just got to leave the x and y. But it's negative 18xy. All right. Felix. Negative 7p times 6q.
Negative 42 PQ.
Good. Negative q. Okay. Alex. Negative 25 times 4. Negative 100. Right. Two numbers, opposite signs. It's negative. Tiffany. Negative 6 times the quantity 7n minus 6. I'm sorry? Okay, so this is the group, so we're going to use the distributive property, right? So you're distributing to everything in the group. So what's negative 6 times 7n? You got to speak up a little bit, I'm sorry.
What was the question?
What is negative 6 times 7n?
42.
What kind of? Negative 42n. And what is negative 6 times negative 6?
46.
What's 6 times 6?
46.
36. Is it a positive or negative? If I multiply two negatives, what does it give me? Positive 36. Good. Negative 42n plus 36. And Linda will give you the last one. I saved the best for you. Negative 1 times the quantity 3d minus e plus 8. Now, this negative 1, I put in there to help you out. But a lot of times you'll see this is just negative, right? Because the 1 is implied. I can just put a minus out there. Because negative 1 times anything, what does that do? It just gives me the opposite, right? So all I'm doing is getting the opposite of this quantity. So what's the opposite of each of those elements?
Negative
3 what?
D
Okay.
minus.
Well, it's the opposite. This is what I told you before. You're not going to want to distribute. You got to distribute that negative. Everybody gets the negative. The negative 1. Everybody gets that. Everyone in the group gets the Snicker bar. So what's this? What's the opposite of negative e? I'm sorry? Plus e. Okay, and then the last one, what's that? Guys, I can't hear her if you're talking. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I can't. -8. Good. Notice all I did when I have a minus sign or a -1 outside is I just made the opposite of everything in there. So -3D plus C -8. Just took the opposite. Does anyone have any questions on those? Okay. You only have a few minutes left, but I'm still going to give you these. Don't turn these in today. You can bring these in tomorrow. Unless you, I don't think you can finish in 3 minutes. Yeah, finish these up overnight with your homework.
It's the same.
Yeah, one from yesterday, one from today. That's for the quiz. If you want to see the quiz grade. Remember we talked about that? You don't have to turn that you can have a few days if you don't get it done. You just have to have it in before, say, Monday. So I know some of you have like 40 or 50 of them to do if you really want to improve your grade. So you don't.
You got 2?
Everyone should have 2. I gave out 2 sheets.
What's that homework?
Wait, no.
It's on the board.
One from yesterday, one from today.
That's mine. That's both mine.
Guys, I'm handing them all out individually. You don't. Write down.
It's saying two different sheets.
One was yesterday, one was today. I didn't do yesterday's because we ran out of time.
This is the same one.
This is section
Distributed property rules for multiplication.
There, I'll take this one. Hey, man, what the heck, man?
Work on your sheets, please. You got 3 minutes. Get a couple problems done. Or not, go.
3 minutes. Yeah,
Those are never on, are they?
Not usually. Never. Well, there's something tonight.
So much homework, dude.
Yes. One was yesterday's sheet, one's today's. Because we didn't get to. That's the makeup quiz stuff. You have a few days. So start working. What's that? That's 2-2. Is this the one that you didn't have a name on it before? That I. Give me a second. Did you just finish this, or is this the one I already gave back and I just didn't mark it in my book? All right, hang on. 2.2. Get there. Where are you headed after this? Where are you headed next? What's your next class?
Are these dunk too small or both?
Yes, they're both. They're 55 minutes. So let's
Here, I left my,
2, number 2. Okay, so this is 2-2. Alrighty, I will mark you down for 2-2. Oh, this is 2-2. Oh, they were stapled together. Ah, okay. Very good. Let's see. So, okay, so you turned these in yesterday then. That's fine. That's fine. Alright, so 2. I will mark those both down. Okay. Here, you can take it with you. Do you need a pass? Does he need a pass to go where he's going, or will he be here?
are you going to art?
Yeah.
I'll give you a pass.
Third, my son's birthday is today.
Alex, when you go through the gym, look and see on the bleacher